Hello, Tavarish YUGOPNIK here, your favorite Slavic political analyst. Hope you're doing well. Today's topic is not exactly our usual bread and butter, as the Americans like to say, but that does not mean it's not extremely important. I do not have a background in history, so I took extra steps in making sure that everything said in this video was carefully sourced. Now, let's get into it. Have you ever said Heil Hitler? Or did a Hitler salute? Have you ever looked at historic footage of a Nazi march and felt this weird animalistic fire brewing in you? I did, a few times, back when I was at the age of 4 or 5 or something. I remember my grandpa's face vividly when he saw me doing it. The confused disgust in his face and my confusion as to why the hell he slapped my raised arm down and engaged in a long but very necessary conversation with me. You see, after having seen Nazis on some English history channels for the first time, me, someone who did not speak a word of English, quite literally saw the Nazis only and exclusively for what they looked like. Disciplined, well-kept, strong, powerful, and proud. Plus, they had a cool-looking little crooked cross thing. What kid doesn't like weird symbols, eh? At that stage, when I was barely peeking out of my mind's tabula rasa, my first instinct to seeing a fascist was attraction. Now, after having been given historic context about the actions of this human excrement of an ideology, even a kid of my age back then managed to feel shame for having endorsed them in my mind. For a millisecond. So why, when taken at pure face value, did these people who dressed in a particular way, who walked and talked and stood the way they did, why did that make that little boy, whose people they massacred in the millions, feel like they wanted to belong, hell, to be one of them? This is the question we'll try to answer here, concentrating on the uniform and the usage of aesthetics as propaganda, with the fascists being the absolute masterclass of this praxis. Also, we'll compare their approach to that of the Allies in World War II and talk a little bit about how uniformity, and fashion in general, can mold the very wearer and those who gaze at the wearer. So, what is a uniform? Well, it stems from the Latin word uni, which directly translates into the noun unifier. The uniform throughout eons did not really move away from that very definition. Today, people like to throw around the word uniformity and address it to people who lack character and who exemplify followers, not leaders. But this is a bit simplistic, is it not? Every subculture, at the end of the day, has its varied uniforms. Metalheads, skaters, or corporate lawyers all have a set aesthetic expected of them to follow. And so did the Nazis. But simply representing their uniform through the lens of the commonly understood definition, which is the military representation of rank and national belonging, would undermine the rather complex and ideologically potent character of the fascistic look. The Nazi of old, in contrast to their rambling and disoriented modern counterparts, left almost nothing to chance. And as all of society was being transformed to fit their warped worldview, the clothes on your back were no longer just clothes on your back, but the very skin you must adopt as an Aryan and as an Übermensch. The bad guy look. The Empire from Star Wars, Star Trek Terrans, or the eternally vigilant Helghast. There's a direct association between a certain look and a certain negative reaction we all have to Nazi-esque aesthetics. But that's really talked about. A much more interesting question is, what superseded what? Do we see that uniform as evil because we associate it to World War II, or was it always intended to be the look of evil? Goebbels, through his and his ministry's groundbreaking propagandistic techniques, aimed, and I quote, to unite all creative persons in a cultural uniformity of the mind. The effect of this uniformity was perfect for the authoritarian regime, a people who support a government and its plans for the nation, openly stating it through the very clothes they wore. Germany had some 240 different uniforms for various jobs, all specifically designed to represent a person's role in this hyper-hierarchical society. So what better uniform to dissect if we want to understand whether dread was an intention or not than the feared SS. SS men were the crème de la crème of the Third Reich and the face of the elite Übermensch propaganda of racial purity that the Nazis would put forth. The SS uniform, because of the elite nature of the organization, took on more symbolism, more ornamentation that would promulgate both the wearer and viewer's image of Aryan traits and masculinity. The SS uniform was usually all black, as opposed to the Wehrmacht's field gray, giving it an air of crispness and power exclusive only to a black dress. In addition to the same elegant effects of the Wehrmacht uniform, the SS uniform added its own ingredient of fear to the fashion of the Third Reich. Fear was an aura to be felt, not by the wearer, but by the viewer. Himmler, the monstrosity of a human being, himself, in a nod to the intention of the SS uniform, said, and I quote, "I know there are many people who fall ill when they see this black uniform. We understand that and do not expect that we will be loved by many people." This simple quote reveals so much both about the Nazi aesthetic but also about the very nature of fascism. In admitting to the intentionality behind wearing fear-inducing clothes, we see that the very apparatus the SS led believed that fear and angst are not only useful but necessary tools at the disposal of the wearer. But what exactly makes us fear a certain aesthetics while others go perfectly unnoticed? Simply put, a combination of mystery and never directly explained symbolism. By leaving it to the onlooker to wonder about what the wearer's uniform represents, and combining it with the actions commonly associated to that wearer, which was murder and disappearance in the case of the SS, the fascist allows the very onlooker to overextend their perception of these secretive and elusive representatives of the state. So let's take a closer look at these villainous mythical embroideries which vastly differentiated the fascist look to that of capitalist and socialist nations. In upper ranks, the centerpiece of the SS uniform was a jacket that much closely resembles a blazer or suit coat. Instead of buttons extending to the collar, which is far more present in traditional uniforms, the jacket's fastening mechanism ended closer to the sternum. This was to display a brown or white-collared shirt and black tie, dress that was formerly part of the SA uniform. The Harry Potter-looking double rune stems from ancient Nordic culture. The Z-rune represented the sun, the all-powerful leader of the solar system, and for the Nazis, a symbol of victory, while the Death's Head, as it's commonly known, has deep roots in German identity. Even before the Nazis, its new NSDAP identity celebrated the victories of Germans of old, but as Himmler said himself, were a constant reminder to the SS that their lives could at any moment be laid down for the betterment of society. The SS runes in the skull show that the SS uniform had a level of form to it that went beyond just its impression at face value. The deeper meaning of the uniform was almost cult-like, with esoteric symbolism adorned across its surface. This exclusivity of symbols gave both the viewer and the wearer a feeling of exclusivity. For the viewer, mysticism and fear surrounded the uniform. These were markings only available for the strongest and purest of soldiers to wear. A hint of sinister elitism was felt just by seeing the uniform, its complexities and symbols not fully understood. The insignia of the SS clothing took on a new meaning in its own right. The ability of these symbols to embody the ideal of victory, of defying death, of power for the organization meant that there were subliminal parts of the uniform that reflected the values of the Nazi Party and its leaders. The boots were often used to make the men look taller. The stark black leather from which the boots were made gave the entire uniform a level of class not really possible with materials like rubber or canvas. The conjunction of high jack boots and riding breeches made their wearer appear taller and therefore stronger, in line with Aryan ideals. This combination also alluded to the Prussian hussar cavalry of Germany's past. Basically, my short kings, you had no representation among these evil tolls. The adoption of the same hussar aesthetic by the Third Reich showed an ode to history that strongly exuded German tradition through clothing, giving the Nazis an air of connectedness to their past. The Reich even had a style guide, similar to today's fashion houses. Many attribute it to Hugo Boss, which in most cases was only the producer and not the designer of the Nazi look, that was left in the hands of different party members. Something not so commonly known and ignored over Hugo Boss sensationalism was the so-called Organisationsbuch der NSDAP, an extensive 678-page book defining all of this, from uniforms to flags, how it's to be made, kept, taken care of, and most importantly, exhibited. The creation of such a book suggests that the uniform was very much a piece of regalia in service of the party as much as a banner, flag, or logo, published by Robert Ley, head of the German Labor Front from 1933 to 1945. I was weirdly surprised by just how much it reads like an archaic version of a brand guidelines leaflet which pretty much every larger company today has. All of this teaches us that the meticulous uniform of the Nazi soldier, this symbol of unachievable power and ideological and genetic purity, was, just like most things in fascism, completely made up. Well, yes, it did borrow from historic looks. The ideal Nazi aesthetic was still manufactured in a similar way a fast food company today would go about designing what their employees wear and what brand logo they exhibit. The fascist approach to uniform design wasn't one of practicality or one which spontaneously came to be, but a delicately balanced representation of the Führer's will. Therefore, when something is created not out of spontaneity, but with direct goals in mind, the argument that there was great intention behind making the uniform look menacing cannot be denied. The tools of state oppression and strict hierarchy in the Third Reich did not only depend on the physical expression of force and power, but seeped into every millimeter of personal life, with the uniform being a perfect representation of just that. It might not be a long shot to state, based on this argumentation, that fascist world-building is exactly that, world-building. A pathetic play on the realities of life where a group of people decided they want to turn the real world into one of fiction. But instead of choosing to turn it into Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, the Nazis wanted to turn it into a weird, esoteric, quasi-scientific world obsessed with hierarchy. Combined with their complete inability to look reality in the face and their attempt to completely alter all which makes us humans, we see at the end of the day, that the fascist is a violent LARPer who wants everyone to participate in their twisted game of pretend. A very violent game of pretend. Billboards, cinema, radio, and television. I don't know about you, but those are the first things that come to my mind when I think of the tools at the disposal of a propagandist. Goebbels saw far more than that. In order to live up to the task of creating a fake yet livable world, all available tools had to be used to make it believable, and the uniform was a perfect fit. Uniform, perfect fit. That's the type of humor you guys subscribe and donate on Patreon for, isn't it? Oh lord, my jokes are almost as bad as genocide. Speaking of genocide, Germany's Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, was famously led by the ideal that propaganda becomes ineffective the moment we become aware of it. Therefore, traditional models of marketing, while very useful, did not give as much freedom of expression, if you want to call it that, to the Nazis when it came to establishing their ideology as paramount and above all others. The uniform, the dress, the very material people chose to put on their bodies was a perfect tool at the disposal of these OG marketing gurus. The soldier was no longer just a representative of the state. He was a walking advertisement of it. His uniform, his insignia, and his swastika defined his belonging to the party and ideology. The Nazi German, when they wore their designated uniform, were to be advertisements on legs, walking billboards constantly shining with the omnipresence and power of the Third Reich. To fully hammer in the propagandistic nature of the fascist uniform and to understand just how different it was to most which came before, at least in the modern era, we should look no further than what the Allied opposition wore. And what better photo to describe this than one of General Rommel, every World War II nerd's wet dream, meeting with the defeated Major Fortune in the early years of the war. The stark contrast between the two men is so obvious it is impossible to miss. Rommel stands proud and postured in his well-fitted jacket, his collar and belt pulled tight, his medals glistening, and his hat perched atop his head firmly, as if to accentuate the rest of his uniform. Fortune stands disheveled, cuffs hanging midway down his hands, collar unbuttoned and clothing undecorated and blousy. It cannot go unnoticed that Rommel's regalia gives a pompous air of power. Fortune stands defeated, both in style and combat. However, this is most likely exacerbated by the fact that this meeting is planned. What this means is that Rommel has taken the vanity of his own uniform into consideration when meeting with his enemy. For Rommel and the rest of the German army, this was an opportunity for a double victory. Fortune and his forces had already surrendered to the Germans, but if the Nazis could appear more powerful through subtleties such as their manners of dress, they could install their own curated image into the eyes and minds of their onlookers. But it would be simplistic to imply only high-ranking members of the Nazi Party wore decorations on the battlefield. While the SS uniform may have trumped the elegance of those of the Wehrmacht, the army, this did not stop the Wehrmacht soldiers from doing everything in their power to show how much pride they had in the uniform they wore on their backs. 4.5 million Iron Crosses were given out, a number so high it either makes the Germans incredibly brave or military awards played more of a motivational role than they do in other armies. It was incredibly common for soldiers to wear it in combat, in trenches, and even in defeat. Abbot Lanzling, a battery commander of the 347th Field Artillery Battalion of the 91st Infantry Division between Florence and Bologna, described capturing a German officer. To quote, "A day or so later, down the corner of this hill comes an infantry jeep, and they've got a German officer as prisoner. I couldn't believe my eyes. Here's a German officer in full dress, with a hat on, full uniform, everything, a monocle in his right eye. His boots are as black and polished as could be. I looked at my boots. They were mud and snow. I'd probably had my trousers on for 3 weeks. But anyway, I thought I must be in the wrong army." The uniform had become second skin to so many as the Reich rose up, and it continued to be, even after it fell. Victor, and I apologize for butchering the name, Klemperer, a famous German diarist and victim of heavy Nazi persecution, kept a diary of daily life in the Third Reich. In May of 1945, he wrote on just that comparison. "The Americans make neither a vindictive or arrogant impression. They are not soldiers in the Prussian sense at all. They do not wear uniforms, but overalls or overall-like combinations of high trousers and blouse, all in gray-green. They do not carry a bayonet, only a short rifle or a long revolver ready at hand. The steel helmet is worn as comfortable as a hat, pushed towards your back as it suits them. No flamboyance at all, no history depicted on the uniforms. A complete practical approach, which contrasted greatly to that of the Nazis." When both the Nazi leadership and random onlookers agree on the almost magnetic nature and intention behind the uniform, then it wouldn't be unacademic to state that the Nazi aesthetic was intentionally and successfully crafted as a propaganda tool of the highest order. The Third Reich's ability to take the very clothes on our back and turn them into loudspeakers for the regime must have seeped deeply into the onlooker, but also the wearer. We can only guess what it must have felt like to see a Nazi uniform every day. But more importantly, what wearing such a uniform did to a person's psyche. Did Klaus, the concentration camp guard, feel like Klaus the father and husband when he took off his uniform and went home? We can only guess, as there is unfortunately much left to be desired when it comes to research on this topic. But on the other hand, tovarищи, I believe it would be absolutely fair to say that their little experiment worked. Never underestimate social engineering and the social body's ability to work against itself. The Nazi uniform was a legitimate advertising tool the second the first fascist put it on, and the moment an onlooker associated it to the ideology. The rest is history. Tens of millions perished primarily as a result of Nazi Germany's insurgency. However, this regime, which was in power for the span of 12 years, has left a wound so deep in our global consciousness that we still talk about it to this day. From biographies to accounts of battles to the publication of images, Nazi Germany has cemented its place as one of the most written about regimes in history. However, few historians have tackled the subject of the Nazis' uniform. Historians like John Angolia and Brian L. Davis, some of the most well-written historians of Nazi uniforms, have published massive uniform bibles on Nazi regalia. Many scholars have written on Joseph Goebbels, the Reich's propaganda machine, and published collections of the propaganda of the Third Reich. Umberto Eco is my personal favorite scholarly analyst of fascism, and long-time watchers of my channel will have to be content with his replacement of Zizek's regular presence in my videos. 3 out of many of Umberto Eco's so-called traits of fascism are most relevant here, and they go as follows. Number 1, cult of tradition. Not tradition itself, but a mystified, overbearing, idealized version of it, something the uniform in all its forms intended to represent. 2, fear of difference. The uniform called on the wearer to openly state their allegiance to one set identity, and those who only got to look upon it were indirectly told to submit and put one on, or perish if they were not worthy. Community not through unity, but through exclusion. And number 3, irrationalism. The inability of the fascists to understand the real material world, and their obsession with quasi-science ranging from race theory to ahistoric conspiracies was inevitably woven into the very fabric of the Nazi uniform. And while the many atrocities committed by men wearing those same uniforms worked in favor of our current characterization of it as the look of evil, it was those very same evil men who intended it to be seen as such before a single bullet was fired. Through appropriation and carefully coordinated efforts, the fascists managed to give a set look an ideological underpinning. While this teaches us a great deal about the potential parasitic nature of fascism, it also teaches us a lot about ideology in general. You probably heard everything is political 1,000 times in your life. But it didn't start like that. It is through conscious intention that men turned the natural world and social order into whatever it is they wish. The cross wasn't the cross before we made it such. Neither was the moon and crescent, the hammer and sickle, or the golden M arc of McDonald's. All things can be appropriated and molded, and with time accepted by the social body. This is where the real danger of fascism lies. While socialism, anarchism, and hell, even capitalism are built in the confines of reality, fascism, in its intention to mold the world to their vision, has the capability of, for the lack of a better word, completely brainwashing its followers to whatever suits them best. If the fascist is allowed to erase history, to erase culture and ideology, and replace it with its own, the way it did with the very fabrics people put on their bodies, then it has the dangerous possibility of changing very real, and hell, sometimes even good people into monsters. If a 5-year-old boy seeing the Nazi swastika wasn't told of the evil it represents, he might just think they're on the right side of history. The only way they lose is when we don't take a single step back in our extreme denunciation of everything they stand for. No pasarán. Thank you, dear Tavarish, for making it to the end of the video. If you like what I do here, consider supporting it by subscribing or donating over on Patreon. For the price of less than a can of beer a month, you can help this channel run. Now, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all the wonderful Tavarishi without whom this would never have been possible. Especially Deep Red Wine, B. Matt, Soup, Nathan Moore, Luxpear, Nibino, John T. Fritchie, Aaron Reba, Sophie, Bradley Young, Cap, ZeroTI.me, Red Messiah, Ras Peterson, Romaine Bryant, Todd Sprang, Crouton and Baguette, Alki Historiker, Marussia Asarabakara, Neil Surio, Sam and Eggs, Jess, Austrian Communist, User, Imperator 230, Fellow Worker, Daniel Murphy, Michael Mahoney, Boyan, Elijah Zamora Woolsey, Kamel Piotrowski, Yiddish Kami, Mike Lunning, Chris Anderson, The Muffin Man, Zane Guevara, K.L.